I'm joined now by J.C. Polanco and O'Brien Murray to help sort out the topsy-turvy world of summer in the city and politicians who do surprising things. But first of all, before we talk about the big surprise of the last few weeks, I want to talk about the hottest primary in, I think, the nation, the congressional primary in Westchester in the Bronx, where Jamaal Bowman is fighting for his life against a strong challenge from George Latimer. What do we think is going to happen?
I think George Latimer is going to win big on primary day. Oh, absolutely.
Why?
Because I think it's clear that from my conversations with voters in that district is that the incumbent does not represent that district. It's just this incongruent. His positions on issues is incongruent. For example, you can't say after October 7th that what we were witnessing was Israeli propaganda and think you're going to do well in that district. You can't vote against a resolution trashing Iran for supporting terrorism and represent that district. It's incongruent.
You live in the Bronx, and I've done a lot of work up there. I agree with you. That district is not his district the way he wants to be, and he didn't get it with redistricting at all. He hoped he would have gotten it at that point. He went after an incumbent congressman, much like AOC did. He was victorious then, but ever since then, he's been out of touch with the community.
Let me ask you a question. But he has Co-op City in his district, and Co-op City has an advantage because the polling place is in Co-op City. Unlike every place else in the district, which is Westchester, you have to drive to the polling place. You can just take an elevator down to the lobby and vote in Co-op City. Isn't that an advantage?
Well, in Co-op City, yes, that helps with turnout, no question about it. But that doesn't mean he's getting 100% of Co-op City. Black voters just don't vote for black candidates. We've learned that over the years. There's got to be a connection to the community and what you're going to do. And George Latimer also has a track record of what he's accomplished as county executive as far as Westchester is concerned, and he can bring that record to the Bronx and go fight for the people that he represents, opposed to fighting for other causes, which is what Bowman's been tagged for doing.
Well, to your point, Marcia, it's about voter propensity, and it turns out that many parts of that district have very high voter propensity. When you look at Rye, when you look at the shore towns and the shore cities, Larchmont, Mamaroneck, you have districts there where the voting propensity is at 75, 80%. So yes, there's an advantage to having an elevator in Co-op City and coming into vote.
Otherwise you have to drive.
No, but that doesn't matter when the voters are engaged. Voters will travel to vote, and in that district, it's not that far from you're not that far from your poll site.
So let me ask you a question. One of the things that happened in that district, which I have not seen yet before in my long career, is that a group formed itself called Westchester Unite, and it's solely to try to get people to register to vote, either vote early, and to get Republicans and independents to switch and to vote in a Democratic primary as well. Have you seen that before, and isn't that an unusual
We saw that actually here in New York for governor. Couple years ago, same thing. It's not unusual. It is a way to be active and to spur activity and a higher intensity to vote possibly, but propensity in your case, what you're talking about. But the reality becomes that's a lot of money to spend on what? What it really comes is the turnout. What can they do to turn out people that are the moderate Democrats to show up?
Mostly turnout in primaries is very low. What makes you think?
And very liberal. Very liberal.
So what makes you think? So if it's low and it's liberal and he's a liberal and he's, isn't he going? He's the incumbent. Doesn't that give him an advantage?
Marcia, it appears that it would give him an advantage. But you mentioned something that's very important. As an independent, I want to speak on this issue. We did this here in New York. We saw a lot of folks come in and recruit Republicans and independents to become Democrats to support Mayor Adams in his primary. And he got about 85,000 people to switch over so that they can vote in closed party primaries. You're seeing the same thing in Westchester. I know a lot of folks that are doing it, but this is the fact. The fact is that this Democrat in this district, when you take a look at the New York 16th, it is a centrist, moderate Democrat. That's who they support. When you look up and down the ticket, they're supporting centrist and moderate Democrats. They're not supporting DSA-supported candidates. And that's what you have in Congressman Bowman.
You also talk about redistricting when he picked up Co-op City and other areas around it. That's one thing. So he's the incumbent, but for how many years has he represented what parts of the district? Also with incumbency, oftentimes comes name ID. Latimer has that as well. He's been on the New York market. He's been around here for years, and he can raise money. He has money behind him. So the incumbency usually has those advantages of money and visibility. He doesn't have either one, and the district is not something he's been at for many years.
Let me ask you one thing, because I live in the district, so I get all the mailings. Sure. And one of the things that I've been amazed at was the Jamaal Bowman mailings trying to make it seem like Latimer was a Republican, that he's taking money from Republicans. He has aligned himself. There was even one mailer which actually astonished me, which said that George Latimer was anti-abortion, which you know was amazing. But is that the kind of tactic that could work, that could get more people to turn out for Jamaal Bowman, because they're basically trying to align him with Trump, and all the mailings are red to make it look like they're Republicans? Does that help him? It's
an old trick to do in close party primaries. Republicans do it to Republicans who seem a little liberal, and Democrats do it to Democrats who seem a little moderate. This is just
what they're also trying to.
It's part of the equation.
They're trying to give people a reason to not vote. It actually is something that depresses the vote. In a democracy, we're trying to tell everyone to come out and vote. Here you have people that Bowman is targeting, rightly so, that are not going to vote for him. So what does he do? He says, Mr. and Mrs. Soft Democrat, you know what? You don't want this guy at all because he's actually a Republican. He's further over.
So let me ask you.
And that's what
it's the AIPAC. It's the AIPAC money that he's trying to target him with. He's saying AIPAC is supporting this candidate. AIPAC is funded by a lot of Republicans. Yes. Yep. And because of that, this is who you got.
One more question, and we'll move on to other topics. So the latest poll has Latimer up by 17 points, but 21% of the people are undecided. Doesn't it mean it could be a toss-up?
Well, you would think, but when you have such an advantage going into this poll, just right before the primary, it's almost impossible. It's insurmountable at this point. And what's insane is that in order for Congressman Bowman to win this election, he's going to have an honest assessment as to where he can bring voters out. And that's going to be Yonkers, Mount Vernon, where he may have a stronger base, even co-op cities.
In today's New York City elections, in New York State elections, you can actually know day by day who's showing up to vote. You get the early voting. You have who responded already by absentee mail. And next thing you know, you have 10 days of early voting going on. You know exactly who voted, men, woman, age, name, the whole thing. You get those voter rolls, you'll know if he's turning out his votes. We knew when Nadler beat Maloney here in New York City, we knew that as soon as the first results came in. There was no question. There were so many early votes done. We knew exactly what was going on.
And Marcia, remember, Hillary Clinton just endorsed George Latimer in that district. I mean, that carries a lot of weight in a primary election.
It does?
Yeah, of course it does. I mean, think about who your Westchester Democrat is in that district, and look how they're voting, and look how they're supporting George Latimer.
But does a Hillary endorsement help Latimer in Co-op City and the other parts of the Bronx?
It just neutralized what you said before about where his money's coming from. So the woman that ran against Donald Trump in 2016 and was anti-Trump, has been anti-Trump from day one, has now validating Latimer as a Democrat unequivocally. Yeah. So when you look at it, the reality becomes absolutely it's a positive. It validates Latimer and goes against Bowman.
I think, and you know what's tough here? I think that Congressman Bowman's going to have to sit down with his team after this primary and see where they went wrong. And it's clear, coming after Israel the way he did, by not sticking with the hurt and pain that folks with ties to Israel were dealing with in that district, was a fatal mistake in this.
Where was Bill Clinton's office? In Harlem on 125th Street. Why? Because he wanted to go to the black community and do it.
Better get out, but we're going to come right back. We'll have to leave it right there for now, but our conversation continues right after the show on our streaming channel, CBS News New York. We're back with a bonus conversation you'll only see here on CBS News New York. We have to talk about the elephant in the room, the sudden decision by Kathy Hochul to pause congestion pricing with just 25 days before it was supposed to go into effect. What was going on?
I'd stand up and clap, but the cameramen would all get mad at me if I did that. Bravo for her for doing it.
Is there a political benefit?
No, but bravo for doing it. And I think one of the things the Republicans have to be careful of is coming at her too hard afterwards, because what's going to happen is the Democratic base is going to say to her, wait a second, you're going against us, and they're not taking you either. If you're in the middle of the street, you get hit by both sides. That's the challenge she's going to have. She did the right thing.
I think I agree with Obi. It was the right thing to do. I am so happy she did it. Obviously,
what are the political implications?
The political implications is New Yorkers are happy. New Yorkers don't want this. The people who want this are the people that live in certain parts of Manhattan. The truth is that you're going to give me a second. The
progressives want it.
You gotta remember, the people that want this are the folks that live in the areas surrounding where the tolls were going to be taken. Small businesses don't want it. We don't want it in the outer boroughs because that means that cars are going to come through our neighborhoods nonstop. It's going to hurt a lot of people. So we're all happy. The only people that are not happy are the crazy zealots, that the utopians, the crazy zealot utopians out there that think that by taxing and tolling everyone is the best way to solve the issue.
Two things on this. Number one, having been in London and seeing how it operates there, it's very different. You have a whole different socioeconomic. You don't have a different state across the way. You don't have different boroughs trying to get in there across the rivers. That's one thing. It's not the same. They keep saying, oh, it works in London, we can do it here in the financial district. It's not the financial district. It's out here. We are now in the zone, number one. Number two, it was done before the pandemic, before a change in the city, and it was called congestion pricing. It is now just an MTA tax. It's no longer congestion pricing. A congestion pricing system would make it very simple for truckers to come up at 9 o'clock at night with no tax, with people working the night shift to drive in at night and park on the streets.
So here's the question.
This didn't happen. This is all about a tax, period.
Let me ask you this question. Is there a political implication here? Because does she really think this is going to help Democrats to defeat the 6 freshman Republicans and help the Democrats take control of the House?
I think so. Listen,
was that a consideration?
Of course, it must have been. You see the polling. No, Marcia, no one likes this except for a small group of people that are environmental zealots who think that you can just tax folks and give them tolls and you're going to clean the environment. That's not how it works. This is going to hurt a lot of people that come in from Westchester, that come in from Putnam, that come in from Ulster and other parts and Long Island. And we know that this was driven by folks on the far left that somehow, you know, there were a lot of sane folks that signed on to it, but it was a mistake.
When Michael Bloomberg first put this out, we talked about asthma, we talked about the streets and the environment in a different way.
That was 2007.
And it was $7. And it was, in the evening, it disappeared. It was a $7 peak time, and then it went down from there to $0. This is not what is out there now. They've changed the entire board on what congestion pricing is.
Because they were greedy?
They were not only greedy, they were pigs at the trough. They were way too greedy, but they also made it the MTA. When Governor Murphy from Jersey, a Democrat, came out against it, the CEO of the MTA came after him and said it's a Republican talking point. It was amazing that they made it all about politics, not about the people.
But I have another question. How important is it for Democrats to take control of the House, given the political landscape, given the possibility that Democrats could lose control of the Senate, and given the possibility that there could be a Republican president?
I think it's very important. I think the Speaker Jeffries can really happen. But Speaker Jeffries right now is seeing tens of millions of dollars being wasted in primaries across the country, and he must be pulling his hair out. He's seeing the candidate selection, for example, in the Mondaire Jones versus Mike Lawler race in Rockland and Westchester County, which is a complete mismatch. He must be scratching his head, asking himself, how is this the candidate that I have going against a very popular Mike Lawler Republican candidate? It's just a problem.
So are you really saying that Speaker Hakeem Jeffries is not going to be Speaker Hakeem Jeffries because there's a lot of tough races, including the Lawler race?
I think that he would have had a better shot had he selected the right candidate to go against Mike Lawler. But he can absolutely. Let me tell you why I think he can still pull this off. There are a lot of Republicans out there that got elected at an off-year election, and now Trump is at the top of the ticket, and I think that people are going to come up. No, Trump does not help them because these are districts where Biden won by 10, 20 points, and they happen to come right under the radar.
Different now.
No, things are not different. When you just look at 2 years ago, they just won their election, and these are Biden districts.
We still don't know if Biden's going to be the nominee, guys.
Here we go.
Are you holding
When do you come up with these things? There's no way
with this debate coming out after this debate.
Obie always throws a curveball.
2 weeks I'll be back after the debate. Let's talk about it.
In 2 weeks, he's going to say, I'm stepping down, find another candidate?
I'm not saying in 2 weeks.
Right before the Democrats have their convention?
I'm not saying in 2 weeks. You have his son right now, which is tremendous pressure on the family. You have a debate going on right now, and you have other things going on within the familial unit.
So who's the nominee?
He's the only one that could beat Donald Trump.
Wait, let's give him the opportunity.
No.
Who's the nominee?
The beauty is the convention would tell us. That's the thing.
So
you would have Marcia. You would have a field day in Chicago. You would have a field day in Chicago. I'm not back. The question is who would replace Biden. The question is when is he going to get out and lead for other people?
Do you remember when
he doesn't want to do it?
Of course not.
It's the first time we don't agree.
No, Joe Biden is going to not only win the nomination, obviously at the convention, but I really think that now this is an honest assessment, and I want New Yorkers to hear me. New York would be better off with a Speaker Hakeem Jeffries any day of the week. If the Speaker comes from New York, you know what that would mean? That means that you have your Senate.
But you're not dealing with the fact of whether Biden could get elected.
No, not only can he get elected, but I believe very strongly that in districts where Biden won.
That happened. His son just got convicted.
But you have a convicted felon running for president against him.
He's old and a little bit.
With another trial.
No, you got come on.
Another trial to come in California. That's the other question.
But why are we talking about Hunter when you have a convicted felon running against Joe Biden for president? This is absurd that we're even having this conversation.
This is purely a question of whether or not Joe Biden will be on the ballot in November.
No, Joe Biden will be on the ballot, and Joe Biden will win this election because he's running against, come on, Obi, he's running against a convicted felon. Do you understand that if you're a convicted felon, you can't even apply for a federal job, you can't even travel to many countries, and you can't even vote in some states, and here's this guy running for president? Let it be the last time I hear a Republican tell me that they don't want convicted felons to vote.
I'm an independent
too.
Wait,
give me a break.
Guys, let me tell you one thing. You see the polls now in the battleground states that are going to decide this election. I think Biden's ahead in one state.
Right. That's correct.
So how is he going to win the election?
I think he's going to win the election because he just had his
favoring Trump.
Marcia, the first ad attacking Donald Trump for January 6th came out yesterday. When Americans are reminded of what this man did to the country on January 6th, I think these poll numbers are going to tighten.
You've known me 20 years. Marcia's known me for as long. I speak what I think, not what I want. I'm talking about what I think is going to happen as a possibility.
You don't really think that Biden is not going to be on the ballot?
I said there's a chance he won't be on the ballot.
There's a chance it could be 6-5 if it's not going to happen. Marcia.
What was your question, Marcia? I'm sorry. I had to get back at my good friend JC.
I'm totally loving this.
We don't get along well, you know.
Marcia.
So I'm going to change the topic because I don't want both of you to kill each other. But
we win.
Former Governor Andrew Cuomo had to testify before Congress this past week about the nursing home scandal. And by all accounts, what he did was blame a low-level person in the Department of Health for making the decision to allow COVID patients back into nursing homes. I wonder if that has the clarion ring of truth, and if you think that that's going to be a winning argument as Congress releases its report.
He was under oath, even though it was behind closed doors. He was under oath. It better be the truth.
Well, it better be the truth, and I think it's really weird because I don't know Governor Cuomo. I just see him from the news and what I remember through the COVID pandemic, and he seems like a strong guy with a lot of bravado. I don't see how he can possibly blame someone else. I mean, that's a hard one for you to think that Governor Cuomo is going to come in and say, former Governor Cuomo is going to say, it wasn't my fault. Someone else did. It's not believable.
I mean, you have to look at it from several sides. There was one argument that says, he was always in control of everything that was going on in government. But on the other side, you have to look at the fact that this was a pandemic. There were a million decisions that had to be made every day, and there was no chart to tell you how to do it. So it could have been either way.
That's fair.
The buck stops here. It's his final decision. The advice he got from the people that knew what they were doing, that was the decision he made on who he was listening to. So did he listen to somebody else? Of course, I hope he did. He's not a doctor. He's not a scientist. The question is whether or not he takes the ownership, and it's what's on the transcript and what he actually said under oath that was in there. He didn't come up with this idea himself and how he was doing it.
It's been a nightmare for a lot of leaders that had to make tough decisions during that time. Even doctors and folks that we trusted to give us the right information today, 4 years later, are saying we didn't.
But I mean, they did the best they could.
Right, that's exactly it. And these are people that were making decisions on the fly. I mean, remember, we have millions and millions of people who took vaccines, and we never even really had a trial out, but we took the vaccines because we trusted it. I'm happy I did. But there are a lot of things that were happening on the fly, and I think that maybe we have to give folks some grace.
Where we sit right now, down the street at Jacob Javits Center, they built that for everybody that was going to show up potentially, and they didn't, thank God. We had a cruise ship ready at the same time. We sat up here outside watching during the daytime. I counted moving trucks, and at night I counted ambulances. That was the life around this neighborhood back then. It was a very different time, a very tough time that we should never have to forget, but we should also be able to look forward and learn from everything, the mistakes and the things that we did well.
So does Andrew Cuomo have a political future?
Well, that's that name is priceless in New York. I mean, Andrew Cuomo, and we know Andrew Cuomo as someone who did a lot of good things. Remember, we could point to a lot of good things he did, but then at the same time, like every politician, and he's not perfect. And I think that we're judging Andrew Cuomo through the lens of perfection during the COVID pandemic, and I think that's a mistake. But then there's some other issues that Marcia, I got attacked on social media. It wasn't my intention to downplay some of the sexual harassment claims that he's dealing with. Those are things that he's going to have to deal with if he does run. He's going to have to explain to voters.
Well, women voters vote for him.
Well, it depends on his explanation and what he tells folks.
It depends how everything comes out in the wash at this point. It also depends who he runs against at what time. I think sometimes it's a question of how it's too soon. If he gives a little bit more time, sees where things come about, and sees the right opportunity, he could have a future.
Okay, last question. Who do you think that Donald Trump picks to be his running mate, his vice presidential running mate?
I'm going to leave this up to you, Mr.
Why leave it up?
I think he goes with J.D. Vance. I think it makes sense for him. You have a young guy who was an anti-Trumper, who became a Trumper from a very important state. He speaks well. He'll carry that cult mantle and do some very good TV appearances.
I think as it sits right now, he doesn't know himself. I think what's happening right now is now that he's out of the courthouse and he's on the road, he's going to have a chance to not only meet with people, but travel with them. When he's on the airplane, when he's at these events, when he sees them speak.
He's dodging. He's dodging. He's dodging.
What about
What's the answer?
As of this moment, there is not a woman on the list that's out there for him.
But what about Elise Stefanik?
Elise's name is out there, no question about it. I think she could be terrific. But the reality becomes, who is he spending time with right now? Pardon?
That wouldn't be Nikki, but at least Stefanik. That would be interesting because
Nikki, I don't see at least much more than Nikki at this point.
Oh my goodness, I think that would be an interesting ticket because then you have New York on the ballot, you have Florida on the ballot, and I think she's Harvard educated. She
knows Washington.
She knows Washington, and she's a Trumper all the way.
Marco Rubio.
Marco Rubio will never do this.
She could be great for New York. Don't forget, with Rubio, you have the challenge in Florida then about what you would do. He'd have to move out of Florida between the election. He can be okay on election day in November, but before the
that's not an issue. I think
before electoral college.
I don't see it. What do you get from him?
Rick Scott's great. Rick Scott is great, but I think his problem is right now he's too green at this point in the national stuff.
You think Rick Scott would add any value to this ticket?
Sure he would. African American? No question.
Rick Scott
Tim
is.
Scott. I'm thinking Tim Scott, not
no,
Rick Scott.
Rick Scott is a former governor of Florida,
U.S. Senate. I don't see him. No, I see Tim Scott. I see.
Tim Scott was my next.
I see Tim Scott much more than Rick Scott. Rick Scott's got too many enemies out there.
Tim Scott would make much more sense than Rick Scott, but I don't see Tim Scott happening either because he's terrible on TV. Terrible. I mean, they've cornered him on the simplest
Donald
question.
Trump doesn't want anybody to compete with him on TV.
No, he wants somebody that can carry that cult mantle that he has, and he wants somebody that could speak well and answer issues and answer tough questions without,
he wants the winner of
withering away on the vine like Tim Scott did.
He wants the winner of The Apprentice. That's what he wants, and he's going to have his chance to have everybody out there trying to see what they can do. But right now, as it stands, there's a few men out there. He's got at the top of the list that he's out there trying to tout around.
So, yes or no? Does his conviction hurt him, or does it help him?
I think it hurts him, of course.
It hurts in the votes, helps in the money.
Does it hurt him enough to prevent him from being elected?
No.
Well, I think so. I think it will, and I think it does hurt him with independent voters in swing states.
What they're going to do is they're going to use that as a wedge issue to some extent of pushing the independents and those that are on the fence about him, say, how could you go vote for him? And the question is going to be whether or not people are going to show up to vote. I don't see them necessarily going to Biden. I see them not showing up to vote.
Or voting for a third-party candidate.
I don't think people are going to waste their vote this time. They saw what happened with Jill Stein in 2016. I don't think it's going to happen. I do think, however, that voters are going to start thinking about democracy, and they're going to start looking at Donald Trump as an autocrat who happens to be a convicted felon.
You agree with that?
No. I don't, because you're talking about personalities.
No, I think no, it's not a personality. He is a convicted felon.
I'm saying that the voters are looking at it as two personalities. The fact of what happened here in New York is not going to weigh to that instance. It's going to weigh much more on the people that are softer on supporting him. Those that are adamant about supporting him are writing checks to him. At this point, they never did before. The amount of money he's raising.
We are now going to come back in a few weeks to see all of these predictions and whether they came true, whether Joe Biden is actually on the ballot, and if J.D. Vance is picked.
Could you imagine I go 2 for 2?
We're gonna see. We're gonna come back. We're gonna do it again. And on that note, thank you both for joining me.
Thank you.
And thank you at home for joining us as well.